Hi there, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. This is the coolest group of people I could imagine. Now I've even met some people in person from hey, David, what's up? Remember Barcelona? We've had some great times. It's so exciting to see a lot of the people that are at the conference. And I'm also excited that two of my, or one maybe, or I'm not sure who's left, but of my co-authors on a next project that I'm working on are here too. So they can feel free to jump in and drop things in the chat. This might be a little bit more interactive, but I know we're also on a timeline. So here's the question for everyone. Drop it in the chat. What if someone asked you, what are 2/8? How would you respond? Send a few responses in the chat. What are 2/8? Just that question without any context. 2 1/8, right? How would you decode it? 1/4, interesting. What would even happen in your head when you're hearing that? 1/4, oh, excellent. Well, I will show you how one of my students responded after insisting he knew nothing about fractions. 7. Does anyone know? Sarah doesn't count. Does anyone know how the student would have gotten 7 from 2/8? Ooh, oh, yes. You look at Avion. That's right. 3.5 plus 3.5. But why is 3.5 1/8? Ah, grams. Someone got the imperial, is it, to whatever the world systems of measurement. Yes, so this is exactly, thank you, Zach, what it was. What are 2/8? 7 grams. And that ends up being a perfect example of fraction addition, of unit conversion, of like a billion things that the students are supposed to know. But as Sarah so nicely introduced, it's knowledge that comes in a very interesting route. So I'll reveal the mystery at the end. But first, I'd like to acknowledge and pay respect as Sarah did to the traditional custodians of our land, the Pomo people of the land I'm speaking from, Sonoma County. And I'd like to dedicate this time that we're in conversation to the students who have been my teachers, and especially students like Alex and Austin and Carl and Oscar and Lalo, to name a few. This research is for you, fellas, and us, the family and friends who will love and remember you forever. So my research often focuses around these queries. Whoops, sorry, let me go back here. Whoa, before we knew the answer to the 8s. What do we know about our students' experiences with math in their life worlds, especially as a part of carceral, outlawed, or otherwise stigmatized activity? And when valuable math experiences are part of these activities, how should we respond? How did I arrive at this question? Well, first thing is that, oh, there it is, 7 grams again. First thing to know is that I'm technically not a math teacher, so respect to you all, and please correct me on anything. My last formal education was in 1993. But since then, my students and the world have been my math teachers as I try to bridge the math standards the state says they need to reach and our lived experience of those standards. I've done just about every job at my secondary alternative education program. Currently, Ms. Tatiana is an English language development teacher for our expelled, incarcerated, and teen parent students. So this means I work at one site that's a detention facility, and it means I work with immigrant students who are still learning English. Well, today, actually, I'm substituting for a classroom teacher. So let's just say my research probably should have been, how do we find substitute teachers? But I don't know if that's an issue with you guys. I wasn't always a teacher. I studied film and communications. That's me as a journalist in my mother's native country of Peru. So my connection to the Funds of Knowledge framework you'll hear about is probably from that background. And I did want to mention that my students are minors, secondary, which sort of belies the A in ALM. But I really found kindred spirits at ALM while I was working on my doctorate, which I finished in May 2022. Yeehaw! There's my Zoom defense screenshot. In my doctorate, I was trying to explore the abundant but controversial skills that my students have. I did not find a lot of groups of people I could work with, so the Math in Prisons group is my people. I'm really anxious to build our international network because unfortunately, every country does have prisons and juvenile halls, and I would argue they all have a lot more in common with each other, even if Tasmania to here, they're still talking about eights. So they have a lot more in common than they do with other schools, even in their own country. I would argue that the carceral status sort of supersedes. Obviously, we have different curriculums and that sort of thing. But like any good dissertation or thesis, mine had a theoretical framework, funds of knowledge. You can look it up, but generally it's about bringing in what the students know from their life worlds outside the classroom to help them reach learning goals. In this case, mathematics learning goals. Now, my focus on mathematics was a result of a specific conversation I had with a student. All my students have the reaction, almost all, when they see fractions. I don't know if it's just American kids or all youth, but they say, I don't F with fractions. A colloquial way of saying, I don't even deal with them. I don't want to know about them. I don't have anything to do with them. But one fine day I discovered that actually they do, and maybe even more than most students. So I was trying to convince one student to work on his algebra, one main obstacle. The fraction bar symbol was not familiar to him. When I showed him a problem like 1/8 plus 1/8 written down, he wasn't sure even how to read it. Is it 1 plus 1 and then 8 plus 8 or what's going on? But when I asked him out loud, what are 2/8, he came back quick as can be, 7 grams. And I eventually got to the bottom of why, and that an eighth is a retail unit, and et cetera, and so forth. And I really got into this idea of what kind of fractions were really relevant in their worlds, and how did something like this, 420 fractions or whatever, connect to so many learning goals that were actually an obstacle in most of their algebra. When we're doing algebra and pre-algebra, but if you have a fraction bar and aren't sure how to interpret that, it just couldn't be ignored, the amount of learning goals that were connected to this. And as I kind of explored it more and more, I found so many different instances of math in the carceral setting. Literally, there's, measurements that turn into years, these conversions between weight and years. They're even on our books as sort of as law. There's a lot of calculating time served, which is 1/3 off their sentence or 6 days more than. I would argue that carcerality, incarcerating people actually turns people into numbers. And so everything becomes math, behavior point system, everything. And we also are dealing with the fact that if you ask someone, what do they identify with? What's their identity? They're often bringing in guns, money, things that are hard to bring into the classroom, or you at least have to be thoughtful. And that there's a lot of that stigma that Sarah was talking about, or the trauma and the feeling that as a group, once they get labeled criminals, they get judged and kind of get portrayed as having nothing in their heads. So seeing school life as sort of antithetical to their life and what's important to them is one of the main effective barriers that I feel like this project breaks down. So ready for a sneak preview to finish up? We actually have an upcoming article, Harrison, Ledesma, Morgan and Morgan 2024. See it soon. It will have a DOI for all of you academic types. That means we can be cited, or it's a different word in the carceral world, but you can cite us in an academic article. So that's going to be really exciting if we get there. We're going to get there, right, Carla? Yes. But it kind of focuses on language. It was an interesting conversation I had with the Funds of Knowledge people in Catalonia. And I would like to say that thank you so much for ALM Barcelona, because that's the magic connection that I made with Moises and a bunch of other people, and Martha Seville, I think, put in a good word. So I was talking to a language woman, Julie Waddington, anyway. So I was talking about these prohibited words, these words that had so much power, but often, like Carla can tell you, she got suspended for saying that 3.5 grams are an eighth, because the word eighth is such a powerful connotator. And I realized too that this was a language thing, because when it was written a certain way in a certain language, it wasn't understood. And when a different language was understood. So the question of do they know fractions is more a question of, can they read the school conventional language for fractions? So we're taking a language lens for our article. And you can, that's our big fancy sentence at the beginning of our abstract. And Carla and I always say when we read it, we feel so fabulous. This paper is a duo ethnography written by 3 carceral student alumni and 1 of their carceral secondary teachers. So yes, it goes from there, but it is really a beautiful first sentence of an abstract, or 2 sentences. And I'd say one of our main research questions is what salient words and expressions from the stigmatized activity of the students have connections to content area vocabulary. So we already went over an eighth, but for this article appearing in Innovation in Language Learning and Teaching, we're looking at the word perimeter. It kind of came up as something that kids had heard a zillion times, like since they were in 3rd grade, perimeter, perimeter, perimeter. And still when you're like, okay, what's perimeter, what's that? Do you multiply, add, what's going on? And the idea of, well, actually, maybe you shouldn't just ask them like here, a pre-question, or, as Sarah said, it's, a little like assessment, but not just what do you know about area and perimeter, but as Sarah was saying, what do you know about stuff in general? Like what are the artifacts, as Vygotsky would say, that really help you define yourself? And in this anonymous, which was very important survey, it was something that I could ask without anyone sort of snitching on themselves or whatever. And if you were not able to do a Google form because you were in a carceral setting, then you could also just do it on paper. But I kind of just asked them, what do you know about area and perimeter? And then one of the things that, when it was like, what kind of songs do you like? This song by James Johnson III, otherwise known as Baby Tron, actually had the word perimeter in it. I don't even know if the student knew that, you can walk back there. I don't even know if the student knew that, or if he was just posting it. But first of all, I found them very interested in sharing. So Carla always says, like, a Google form, like kids are like, oh, because you can fill out about yourself. Kids who, literally a kid who was asleep was like, a Google form? Oh, I'll cut and paste my favorite song in. And of course, this song is literally about shooting someone dead, which of course is not something, like Sarah said, that we're endorsing. So we need to develop protocol around this. But the fact that the word perimeter was very well illustrated by this song lyric, I think was something important to pay attention to. And actually in the carceral setting, in ours, in the juvenile hall, the students hear perimeter all the time because the guards walk the perimeter every morning. Perimeter is like a big police and carceral word. And the idea that it's going around and not inside is a really big part of understanding the concept. So that's kind of our sneak preview. And just even in this, just to leave on this note of thinking the worlds that our students are kind of trapped inside or working with, and how area and perimeter is, in a sense, tragically very apparent to them in their own room, where they have the same size brick going across, multiplying. You could figure out the area very easily, actually, in a sense, of their room compared to other spaces. So it's something that we can use, I think, to move them on. And when they're out and about, they can maybe be a little bit more friendly with school. And that's kind of my ultimate approach. But I just want to thank everyone again for thinking and being involved in these students' lives. And hearing about Babytron. Maybe you'll look it up on geniuslyrics.com. And I just really look forward to working with my co-authors and trying to make this math in prisons group like just a real big deal.